All right. Court, how's
All
it,
right,
man?
right
How are
on.
you?
Hey, I just set up my camera a little bit better. Rich, how
No.
are you?
I'm so good, and you? Good to see you, man.
Yeah, likewise,
How's things?
likewise. How are things in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, they're starting to get cold, and I'm sure you're getting a little warmer there, nice and sunshine, and the
Yeah,
mountains must be
finally,
nice and open.
finally. It was a beast of a winter here in Colorado. So yeah, we're getting some nice, warm, sunny days. It's beautiful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, things are changing fast here. And how are you guys holding up in this whole incredible time we're going through?
Whew, wow, crazy times. If I've said it a million times already, I mean, doing all we can. That's what you do.
Yeah,
Still fight for conservation, still fight for keeping the dream alive, and things are gonna we're gonna weather the storm. Things will be fine.
absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
yeah,
All right, so just to get things started, guys, everyone watching and those who are coming in, this is Court Whelan. He works for NatHab. He's a guide with me, and he does trips all over the world. I mean, to the craziest places. We're talking monarchs, we're talking Northern Lights, we're talking Alaska, Myanmar, where else? Geez, like Yellowstone, Madagascar, Borneo. I mean, we're gonna go deep into this whole thing. And besides that, he's an epic photographer, and I'm really looking forward to having you on today, and we're going to have a good chat.
cool. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Good intro. Yeah, a lot of places on that list there.
Yeah, totally, totally, totally. And what a pleasure to be able to go to so many places. I think as a guide, from my perspective, the places I want to go are the places that I've never been, and to all the wildernesses, and you getting to do that.
hmm
But that must, I mean, you've got a wife that must take a lot of strain on relationship and time away from home. I mean, how much time do you spend away from home in a year?
Yeah, so over the past, several years, it's gone up and down a little bit, but I've been averaging about 80 days in the field, which is not, it's probably like, part-time guide more or less.
Yeah,
Like I think, a lot of guides are out there for about 140, 160 days. So about 80 days is a pretty good balance. I mean, I think that's why I like to do the balance between the office and in the field.
yeah,
It kind of keeps me grounded, here in Colorado. I've
yeah.
got, a life here, but then of course I have this insatiable desire to explore the world, just like you and just like those people are probably joining in on this talk, is that it's a big wide world out there. And I caught the bug, so to speak, early on, and just wanted to see it all. I mean, and as all things, the more you travel, the more you're with guests and guiding people, the more you learn about other things, and the more places you want to go. So
Totally.
the list is constantly growing of where I have not been but want to go.
Yeah, completely. And tell me, so as a guide, how did you get into guiding? What was your routine?
Oh, how well, so I mean, I guess there was the aha moment, but then there's also like, what is the DNA that makes it up, the nature and nurture. So I've always loved outdoors. To be totally frank, I was not one of these, kids growing up that would go camping with their family all the time. Like that was just not how I grew up. I lived in Florida, and while Florida is a beautiful place, I mean, you go
Yeah,
to the beach, like that's what there is to do in Florida. But as I started to grow up a little bit, in middle school and then certainly high school, and then definitely when I got to college, it was like, okay, I want to backpack, I want to trek, I want to hike, and I started just doing that in very, very basic ways. I mean, backpacking in Florida, and if you know Florida, it's like an exaggerated sand dune, basically. I mean, in terms of the topography, I think the tallest, the highest elevation in southern Florida is literally the landfill outside of Miami. So it's very flat. So it was funny, I made lemonade out of what was there. But then, as I kind of got in and more with nature, it basically led me to a degree, and I started studying entomology, bugs,
yeah,
insects, and then that's where the aha moment is. So like I kind of had this set up, like I wanted to do more and more. And then really it all came down to this one trip to Belize. It was my first real big deal international experience
yeah.
early on in college. A friend of the family owns a very, very small little adventure outfitter out of Santa Cruz, California. And she does like a trip to Belize every other year for a high school group. And I was studying entomology. I really wanted to be like a tropical entomologist. I'm like, hey, can I join? Can I go on your trip? Can I pay my way? How do I do it? So yeah, I paid my way on as an intern. And the big moment was I went about a week before this trip she was leading.
Yeah.
And I trekked around with backpack, an 80-pound backpack. I had to look ridiculous. And this is back, going on 20 years ago in Belize. And I'm sitting there in this jungle in the world's first and largest jaguar sanctuary. And it hit me. It wasn't like exactly like a light bulb, but, I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, this is kind of boring. I'm just sitting here in this hut, I have all my provisions with me. There's a jungle out there, but like, what do you do? And so I guess what it was is this evolution in my mind that, hey, you got to get out there. Like the thing to do is to hike. It's to look for bugs. It's to reflect and just soak in nature. And through that, and then the next 2 weeks of guiding, it was like my big aha that like, holy cow, this is what I want to be doing. I want to teach people about nature in nature. I was in kind of like an academic track, but I wanted to be teaching people about nature in nature. And if you've ever studied like psychology, there's this, I don't want to go too deep here, but like this idea
of
go
like, deep, man.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and like, it starts with shelter and then, food and blah, blah, blah. And then the top is like this idea of self-actualization when you realize that like you have everything. And I felt that when I was in Belize, even though like the bottom part of the pyramid, like the shelter and the food was like very, very basic, I was living in a hut with a sleeping bag. I brought all my own rice and beans and cooked over like, a little stove. And this is all familiar to like a lot of other guides. This is nothing new, but for someone that's never done it before. So that was when like, okay, this is what I got to do. And then basically, I just kind of mentally fast tracked myself to go that route. Went back to the university, went to my chairman of my department and said, hey, I really want to, do ecotourism. There's this new thing. It was not really a household word at the time about, this is like the early aughts, like 2003 or so.
Yeah.
Like in terms of a term, like people knew about it, but it's like, I want to create a discipline. I want to create a track of study of ecotourism and entomology. And he's like, sure. Okay. Like we have no textbooks. We have no teachers. We have no funding. We can't do any of this, but you can apply to the main university president's office for funding. You can look up what teachers might be a good fit. And so I kind of designed my whole curriculum around all this, and just realized that this is definitely the track for me. And then the big moment for guiding really, so that all set me up for what I wanted to do. And then the big moment for guiding is my graduate school advisor. He had a small company and resurrected it, a small travel company, and just kind of gave me the reins and said, okay, here's the name, here's the computer, here are the files. If you want to try to start this thing up again, go for it. And I said, sure. And so I just started planning trips from scratch and learning the hard way. And I was the website programmer to the customer service line to the operations coordinator, and then I would guide the trip. And it took off. It did really well.
Amazing.
And 70 expeditions later, I was in grad school. I was guiding these trips, planning these trips. So I guided, on all 7 continents by that time. Got a master's and a PhD out of it. Yeah. And it was like, holy cow, this is actually working.
That's amazing.
That's my
tell me
story.
how it's an incredible story. I mean, there's not a lot of people that take the academic route and find an academic route through it. So for the academia and those people that have that sort of inclination, I mean, how did you get the master's and the PhD out of the business side of things? Where did the research?
So that's a great question. So I was in the actual entomology department, which is what we would call, a hard science. It's like, tests and variables and control studies and all that. But, being in Florida, 90% of the department is all studying like blueberry weevils and citrus mites and, like agricultural, like applied sciences. And so they love this idea of someone coming in, trying to turn everything on its head, doing something totally different, because it's interesting for them, and it actually makes the department look very well rounded. So they supported me, with ideas and leniencies and all that. But, the basic gist for, I think, most masters and PhDs is like your masters, you take a ton of coursework, your advanced coursework. You design some moderately robust study. I chose to study the effect of butterfly farming on its local environments. So it was like, it wasn't really like a study of, ecotourism behaviors. It was like, find something in ecotourism that you can like study biologically. So I did that for my master's. And then PhD, you can take coursework, but usually it's just completely designed around your your dissertation, your actual, your publication that you're going to do. So I used this company that I was running as a case study, and I kind of did two halves of my dissertation. One was understanding, the entire experiment that is this new idea of ecotourism entomology. Like, what is it? It didn't exist. Yeah. So studying like, okay, butterfly watching, it is biodiversity. It is, I led a lot of scientific trips where I would get researchers from around the country and around the world to join me on a trip. I plan all the logistics. I get all the permits, and I get like a nice research station rented out for us. You just pay, $1,500 or whatever for a couple of weeks. I'll cook the rice and beans, and you just do your research. I take care of the logistics. So there's like all these different ways it evolved. And of course, the monarch butterfly migration is a great example of true ecotourism entomology. So mixed with like that sociological side, I did an actual, there we go, nice. I did a study on the effects of ecotourism on the monarch butterfly migration, and primarily with things like noise, flash photography, oh, nice, that's cool. So kind of just understanding, no one ever did a study on like what is now about 250,000 visitors a year in these small sanctuaries. What does it do to the butterflies? Unfortunately, I won't tell you all the results here because it took me 593 pages to explain it. But basically, that was the dissertation. Yeah. But basically, I mean, the effects, the positive effects far outweigh the negative effects of ecotourism. The negative effects are not really even negative. They're very benign. The effect of noise, the effect of flash photography. In a weird turn of events, the flash photography in a laboratory controlled study turned out to increase the lifespan of monarchs notably. And this has to do probably with their migratory genes and how they perceive light and how they switch reproductive maintenance for lifespan, because the migratory monarch butterfly lives about 2 to 4 times as long, and I think there's a correlation with light there.
That blows my mind, because how many life cycles? There's 3 life cycles through that migration, and then last one is longer.
So the whole year is basically one big cycle. You've got about 3 to 4 summer generations that all live 1 or 2 months. And then you have one generation that actually makes the whole travel down to Mexico, overwinters for 4.5 months, and then makes a third of the travel back up to the United States. So that's actually just one generation that does the whole thing. Over the course of the year, you have about 3 to 5 generations.
That's amazing. That really
so it's pretty wild.
Quite crazy.
But essentially, so studying ecotourism, it was my way of conservation. I feel humbly that when you can add value to natural ecosystems and put money into the pockets of local people and to basically fund conservation, that's like the most powerful way to save things, save species, save habitats. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a world where everything does come down to finances. We can't avoid that. Don't run away from it. Understand how to harness that. And I think ecotourism, aka conservation travel, absolutely fits that bill. It's pretty exciting.
And now we're going to diverge a little bit, because you're on the economics of ecotourism, and in the current crisis, we've obviously got a huge crisis that goes beyond just our health. Obviously the world's having a chance to breathe and do a little bit more, but by the same token, ecotourism has taken probably one of the biggest hits in the market. So how do you see us getting over that hump?
Yeah, it's a great question. So just to set the stage here, obviously, travel more or less has stopped completely, like a screeching halt. And considering how fast it was growing, and considering how many places there's like solid travel, that's jarring. It's jarring for local economies. But I think the most like immediate effect is when you no longer have ecotourists in national parks in Africa, when you no longer have local folks defending their livelihoods by keeping parks open and whatnot, you have this really desolate change where wildlife is no longer being monitored and protected, even if it is in a small scale. The eyes that we have as ecotourists for the landscape, being out on safari, whether it's in North America, Africa, you can go on safari in Antarctica, it's all safari. That actually is great conservation. It's great immediate like triage conservation because it's dissuading poaching. It's dissuading people from going in and stealing resources. So you have like two effects. One is sort of like the immediate effect of like just the people not being there. People that are, you know, hungry go into national parks and forests, and they will hunt. They will take bushmeat. They will collect firewood. They might illegally divert water from streams, you know, to create their own kind of, you know, makeshift sort of aqueduct, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then the longer term impact is that, you know, these people are employed by ecotourism. They're employed by people visiting the area. And, you know, it's not like North America and in Europe and other places where people have been able to save for emergency funds. It's not like there's unemployment, you know, so these people have just also come to a grinding halt of not being paid. And then it's like a loop right back to the beginning. So these people are no longer being paid, are now desperate for food to put on the table. They're not desperate to buy the next iPhone. They're desperate to put food on the table. And so, you know, they might have to make hard decisions to say like, hey, I've been a conservation ambassador since I grew up, but I might have to cut down this tree because I have no other way to boil my water to drink clean water. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. So, you know, the solutions, of course, are to open things back up as soon as possible, but we have to do so very, very safely. And we're not, of course, advocating for jumping the gun, but we have to be smart now and get rid of this thing ASAP. We have to invest in, you know, obviously, you know, getting vaccines and getting treatments and whatnot, but also, you know, what the tourism industry is doing in the meantime, and I'm really proud of Natural Habitat for doing so, is actually just putting money back into local communities. You know, we're not going to these places at the moment, but we are paying people, maybe not, you know, as if the safari industry was in full 100% swing, but we're paying for basic needs and necessities, basic healthcare, basic food, shelter, and that sort of stuff. So we wish we could do a lot more, but I think that, you know, that touches on the fact that we've always sort of led the pack on that kind of stuff. And it's great that other companies are following suit. And I think, you know, we have to support the industry that supports us.
Totally. And I think, you know, when we had that discussion the other day with Ben and the idea of that fund that's been put together, and just for anyone that is going to watch this or watching this now, that there is a fund that NatHab has got where you can donate money, and the money goes to the right places. And that's an important thing about trying to keep this all rolling and moving forward, so that once we break out of this lockdown and everyone travel starts again, that these companies are still running. Because otherwise, if the companies are gone, we're gone too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the ripple effects to wildlife conservation could be disastrous. You know, we've got great partners with folks like World Wildlife Fund that are boots on the ground researchers, conservationists, but it is such an added benefit to have ecotourism within the mix. You know, I'm not sure how long, if we're talking about years, how long the conservation from the ecotourism side can be split to have anywhere near the same efficacy. So it's definitely concerning. You know, we hear some great reports about letting nature and, you know, things breathe and rebound, but I fear that that's mostly constrained to like urban environments, which are not what we're talking about here. We're talking about wilderness that is relatively inaccessible. And so that's my biggest concern about all this, is what's happening to those wilderness areas.
And again, I think places like North America, in the more affluent areas where there is still some funding that can go in, there's government to do it. But you look at places in Africa, in Madagascar, in Myanmar, where livelihoods of people have been built around tourism. Everything that they do, the money they get, everything is from tourism. They're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest through this whole thing.
Yeah, and unfortunately we won't hear about these stories. I mean, we will, being internal, but you know, unless we're the ones reporting all this, you know, unfortunately, you just have to know that it's happening, and it's not going to make the headline news. You know, that's just unfortunately not how things are. But you know, I think there will be some, you know, hopefully some good news out of all this in the very end. And you know, I think that when things are clear to travel, we know that there's going to be pent up demand. We know people are going to, you know, absolutely want to continue doing ecotourism. They want to continue to travel. And I think that as long as we can squash this whole thing in the next 6 months, you know, we can get away with this with hopefully minimal damages.
Yeah. There's a question that's come through here. Has there been a change in wildlife behavior now that there aren't any game drives going on or tourists moving around? What would your answer to that be, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So what I've noticed, I mean, if we're talking about specifically game drives, that makes me think of Africa. That makes me think of the savannas, southern, eastern. In my experience, wildlife has been, habituated is not really the right word, but they are so indifferent of vehicle drives. They have essentially, we're talking about generations upon generations of species, even ones with long lifespans. That are used to these safari vehicles, and they're just another thing on the landscape. I think that's one of the beautiful things, is that a safari vehicle is like this like this black hole where the animal just doesn't care, and so that's why we can get such great photographs. So I think we've done such a good job, not me, but the safari industry has done such a good job of keeping that benign influence, that nonchalant aspect of safari drives. I don't think animals care whether they're there or whether they're not. Like if the vehicles are there or they're not. I've never noticed them doing anything markedly different because there are vehicles there. Therefore, I can only assume they're not going to do anything markedly different when they're not there.
Yeah. Well, I think that comes back to what you're saying with the habituation. The idea of habituation is getting the animals used to that so that they do carry on with natural behavior without our influencing them by being there. But I think from my perspective, it's not what's happening in natural areas that's changed. I think it's what's happening in urban areas, because there are all these videos that are coming out now. Well, in South Africa, we had the penguins walking through one of the towns the other day. So things are starting to move around in places that weren't moving because there is no people activity. So they're sort of spreading out a little bit more. But that, as soon as we start moving again, is just going to be shoved back into the same place.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yep, fully agree on that. Yeah, that's where we're seeing the most interesting change. And again, that's what's hitting the headlines, of critters moving back into urban areas. At the moment, that's okay. We, of course, are concerned about human-wildlife conflict at some point. That's a real big issue. But if there aren't humans around, i.e. walking around streets, then you don't have that conflict. So for the moment, it's pretty benign.
Yes, exactly. All right, I'm gonna divert a little bit because I want to know a little bit about the areas that you go to. We spoke a bit about the butterflies, and one of the things that's on my bucket list that I'm still, and you need to put a word in for NatHab, but I want to do the Northern Lights. For me, to be able to see that, and let me put a photo up here. But I just explain a little bit about this trip to me. I've heard about
fantastic. And you got that's one of my favorite photos I took. This is back in 2017. I think I snapped this shot. And it was funny. I'll quickly explain this photo. So we're in Churchill, Canada, subarctic Canada, around the 59th parallel, perfectly just underneath the Aurora Oval in this little town. And but in the winter it's cold. The weather's unpredictable. And this trip specifically, it got some of my best photos of Northern Lights ever. But we actually were delayed leaving Churchill for 2 or 3 days because of major winter storm. And you can imagine how interesting that is as a travel coordinator, as an expedition leader, getting, hotel space that was supposed to be blocked off for incoming groups. The incoming group's not going to be there. And then rearranging international flights. So it's like, and then just the whole uncertainty. I mean, uncertainty is such a topic of today. It breeds, fear and it's just not a good thing. So we're like, when are we going to get out of here? Like, is it another week? Is it another 2 weeks? But it ended up being 2 or 3 days. But this is the very, very last night when we just moments before got the clearance that we are going to be taking off the next morning. And then the sky opened up with this beautiful aurora. It was like this crazy, like, I actually, even though it was stressful in the moment for those extra few days, I wouldn't trade it for things. I got some of the best Northern Lights views and photos of my life. But anyway, Northern Lights, it's an awesome thing to see. I mean, it's Mother Nature's fireworks show. It is something, if you've never seen it, and let me clarify, I've never seen it like overhead. Yes. Some people have seen it on the horizon, especially in northern states of North America. Sometimes, like Wisconsin and Minnesota and Montana, you can kind of see a little bit. But when it's overhead, it's spectacular. And you have to be underneath what we call the Aurora Oval. And it's a zone of high magnetic activity right around the geomagnetic North Pole. Not actual North Pole, it's just slightly askew based on like the Earth's magnets and whatnot. But basically you have all these solar particles streaming down towards the Earth. These particles bombard oxygen and nitrogen. They explode, and the energy that they release is released in the form of light. And so you get these beautiful green and sometimes pink shows from the Northern Lights. And it's so cool. What we do is we We head up to the Arctic in the middle of the winter because it's going to be the least chance of clouds. Clouds happen way below the light, so if you get clouds, you're not going to see them.
You're done. Yeah.
You gotta put yourself through a little bit of difficulty and hardship. You know, we're talking about like -30, -40 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius.
I'm already
-40.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's cold, but there's something absolutely ethereal and majestic about being out there watching this light show at night, and just putting context into everything. I mean, it's so otherworldly that you can't help but, I mean, people. So the funny thing is people will be very, very worried about the cold, of course. Coming from temperate, even subtropical areas, we get people from Southern California and Florida and Texas, even Hawaii, coming up with us, and they're very concerned. But as soon as those lights kick off, they might be sitting inside at one of our warming huts with just a sweater on, and I'll run in and say, guys, the light, they're just coming out right now, and they'll say, leave the jacket, and they'll stay out there like, whatever, this is so beautiful. So it is very transformative. It's one of the coolest things you can see. It's not nature and wildlife in the traditional sense, but gosh, it's just every bit as brilliant.
But again, it's exactly what you're saying with that ethereal. For me, just staring up at the stars and taking photos of the stars, very often our lives revolve around, it gets dark, we go inside, we watch a TV. Suddenly now you're putting your body in a completely different space, and you're now staring up at this natural beauty that you can't really understand, and you just go, wow. It so hits cool. You right in the soul. It is something really amazing.
I mean, the closest thing I can compare it to truly is like a really good fireworks show. If you've ever been out watching fireworks and that grand finale happens, and you're like, whoa. I mean, it's like that, but you realize that it's just a totally natural phenomenon. And they swirl, they move in really active substorms, as we call them. You look over there, oh, look at that one. Oh, look at that one. And it's just like the sky is just swirling and moving. It's amazing. So everybody must see this at some point in their lives, somehow make it happen,
And then the photographer in me wants to know how long your exposure was for a photo like that. When you're taking photos of the Northern Lights.
Between 5 and 20 seconds. So pretty similar to astrophotography. Yeah. Okay. In a really big substorm, when it's really moving, you actually don't want to get a very long exposure. Like 5 seconds is about what you want, because otherwise, if you get too long of exposure, as you can imagine, and the sky is swirling, the whole sky just looks like a diffuse green. And you actually want to capture those ribbons and the movement. But at the same time, you need to get enough light. So it's a little bit of a balance. But on really, really bright shows, 5 seconds. When it is just that very thin band across the horizon, which sometimes these do start before they move overhead. You might be at 20 seconds, even to take a test shot at like 25 seconds.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, and then while we're in these cold nether regions of the world, tell me about the polar bears. I mean, this is one of NatHab's all-time selling trips.
Yeah, this is it. This is really what put us in the map in a big way. It wasn't our first trip, but it was one of the first, and it's no doubt been one of the most successful programs. It's actually the same town, believe it or not. The best place in the world for Northern Lights is great. One of the best for polar bears as well. You get a migration of about 1,000 polar bears through this area each and every year as they wait for the ice to form on the edge of Hudson Bay. And it's pretty darn cool. We are not going to see all 1,000 bears, but it's always, with wildlife, it's always quality over quantity, right? Yes. I mean, you're thinking that, well, it'd be cool to, see this and that, but you never know what you're going to see up there. It's always something new. It's one of the few places in the world where you can almost be guaranteed to see a polar bear in one way or another. And not just that, but it's one of the few places in the world where you're very likely to see male bears potentially sparring. We still don't entirely know why this is the only place in the world. It's probably just because it's relatively accessible. And so many places in polar bear habitat, you can't watch them anywhere near the amount of time that we can watch them, being so, relatively accessible in Churchill. There are no roads. You got to fly there or take a train, but it's relatively accessible compared to some ice flow, off the coast of Russia. So it's great. We're seeing in the course of, great trips, 2 dozen bears, but again, it's always that quality over quantity. It's that mother and cubs ambling down the shore at close range. It's watching 2 males play fight like they're doing here. And that stays with you for a lifetime.
That's amazing. I mean, and just the habitat change and everything. I I really want to get there just because of how quickly things are changing. We just don't know how fast it's going to change. But just
Exactly.
that idea of being able to see these guys is absolutely spectacular.
It's pretty amazing, and it always surprises me how gentle and cuddly they look.
Yeah.
When you read stories and understand the biology, you realize that these are, it's one of the few animals in the world that actively hunt humans when given the opportunity. I mean, they're used to eating 600-pound seals, taking them out of the water in one fell swoop. We're almost not on the food chain because we're too small. Like, we're a snack for these guys.
Yes.
So you hear all this and you read all this and you start understanding it, but then you see them just walking along and they look like they're just walking to the next Coca-Cola commercial, walking like they're going to go snuggle with Santa Claus. They're so gentle and slow and methodical. Even when they're sparring like this, it's nothing intimidating. It's just showing how nature can be so indifferent. Even though these things are some of the most powerful dominant animals in the world, they're still just extraordinarily relaxed in their surroundings. It's
amazing.
Cool.
Amazing. Okay, let's hop across the Pacific, and I want to chat about these cool guys. I mean,
Nice.
Borneo is an epic space.
Yeah, so this is a trip, I've been guiding for several years now, and it was always at the top of my list. As a young biologist growing up, I mean, seeing Borneo, the legends and the stories that have come out of this place as being one of the biggest untapped wildernesses in the world. And it's still so much that way. It's extraordinary. So here we're looking at a big male orangutan at one of the conservation centers. But the great thing is that Borneo has this network of both conservation centers that are still very wild. There's no fences. They can go wherever they want. But they come in for routine vet checks just to make sure the population is doing well. But then that's juxtaposed with this awesome wilderness in the heart of Borneo, where we do so much work with World Wildlife Fund, but also it's kind of, it's so much of the core of the trip is going to these dense jungles where you're likely to see orangutans in the wild. You're likely to see proboscis monkeys. The only place in the world you're going to see proboscis monkeys. Nice, there we go, cue it up. And my kind of elevator pitch on why Borneo is fantastic is, well, of course it's a rainforest. So anytime you're in jungles and tropical environments, you have extraordinary biodiversity, which is really thrilling to see. A lot of the rainforests in tropical areas of the world, you're going to see the small stuff. You're going to have to appreciate it. You're going to have to appreciate the small birds and the smaller monkeys and, the butterflies and the beetles and other insects. But, frankly, in a lot of the big jungles of the world, the chance of seeing big stuff is small. The chance of seeing cats and felines and whatnot, going to Costa Rica is not extremely high. I mean, you're going there because there's so much other natural beauty. Yeah. But the crazy thing about Borneo is you get all the small stuff, you get the cool insects, you get the cool birds, but you also get pygmy elephants. You get, some of the largest monkeys in the world with these proboscis monkeys. You get the only great ape outside of Africa, the orangutan. So you're seeing the small stuff, which is so wonderful. Yeah, and sun bears too. I mean, the world's smallest bear species, nestled here in the tropics. So you're getting this wonderful balance between all the great small stuff that you'd expect, beautiful stick insects and amazing butterflies and colorful birds, other monkey species as well. But then the big stuff is waiting, and you're very likely to see it. Yeah. It's really thrilling. So, and then, at the end of the day, Borneo, it has all that stuff. There's a lot of stuff. It's relatively like routine, or routine's the wrong word. Like it's sort of expected and predictable as an expedition leader. I'll never, totally let on to that because I do want people to be surprised. But you're counting on seeing some of these things. But then there's like a whole nother 50% of animals in fauna that is unlikely, like your clouded leopards, your marbled cats, that there's a real honest to goodness chance. And that just blows the lid off.
Have you seen before?
I've seen some of the felines. Yeah, I've not seen a clouded leopard. No, that's still on my list. Yeah. Oh, I know. Can you imagine? But yeah, there's some smaller cats that I've seen. They're usually, they're darting across a trail, and it's always at dusk or on a night safari. So it's, hard to track them, hard to see them. But I have seen Western tarsier, which is fantastic. Wow. Tarsiers are just extraordinary. I have seen slow loris before, which is also super cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, some great things to be seen. And again, those are all like the bonus, the mixed kind of grab bag of what. So we expect and hope to see orangutans and proboscis monkeys. But what about all these X factors that we know if there's any place in the world that's going to give us a high chance of seeing them, it's Borneo, and it always delivers something special.
What a cool spot. And then obviously while we're still on that area, Papua New Guinea and that whole side of things and the stigma around cannibals and craziness like that. Tell me a little bit about, I mean, the face paint, I mean, the people portraits and things for photography must be incredible.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. So, I would say Papua New Guinea is for culture what Borneo is for wildlife. I mean, Borneo's got some extraordinary culture, but it's far, far interior in the island, very inaccessible. But Papua New Guinea still has that extremely wild culture, and it's amazing. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So here we have a huli warrior about to put on what they call a sing-sing, just like singing with your voice, a sing-sing, where in these brief bouts of like 5 to 15 seconds, they just go wild and they jump and they scream in this coordinated cacophony of motion and sound, where it's weird. It's like it's coordinated, like it's choreographed, like they're doing this as a war dance, but it's the most wild, disconnected thing that you truly, as a visitor seeing and photographing that, you're kind of a little bit taken back. You're like, whoa, okay, that just happened. And it's like that for hundreds and hundreds of tribes that still do this. And of course, the nature is really great too. I think a lot like how Borneo is, Papua New Guinea, so much of the benefit, so much of the pleasure is seeing this expansive wilderness and knowing how untouched it is, and knowing how it's going to be like that for many, many years. Papua New Guinea is extremely hard to navigate around. It's extremely difficult to get through the various landscapes. You have to fly by charter plane. There are very, very, very few roads, and that's a great thing, to be honest, is keeping it relatively pristine. But yeah, you've got all these species of birds of paradise. You've got tree kangaroos and all sorts of different marsupials, and of course the insects. The butterflies are probably, I'm
so surprised to hear you say you like butterflies.
Yeah, right. Token entomologist here, but no, they're some of the most extraordinary in the world. And if you have an extra second, those viewing, just Google bird wing butterflies, and they're like the size of your head, and they have this amazing iridescent green and yellow and blues. They are some of the most spectacular insects in the world, and Papua New Guinea is one of their main habitats and homes. It's really cool. So yeah, I love Papua New Guinea. It is wild in all the right ways.
Yeah. So I'm going to take you back home because I want to know a little bit about this area and these beautiful rocks. And I mean, I can see the guests trying to squeeze through holes there. I mean, just the States is really beautiful, just on its own
right there.
Oh, is it you?
Yeah. So I had been guiding for going on 20 years now, and I still think to this day one of the most beautiful places, especially landscape wise, on our planet is the desert southwest of the United States. It's simply extraordinary, and there's so many people that have not seen it and that live here, and it's in our own metaphorical backyard. I am constantly blown away at the beauty every time I go to these canyons in places like Arizona and Utah. It's really, really amazing. Now, for our trips, we don't get into this slot canyon specifically. This one's a little more technical, but these striations, the color of the rock, the sandstone, that's what the whole Southwest is like. When you go to places, Zion National Park, when you go to Grand Canyon and Bryce National Park, this happens to be Escalante National Monument, which we have done trips to. Unfortunately, it is under a bit of conservation pressure right now. The current administration is looking at cutting it down in size considerably. So that's where, I want to bring more people to these areas, show them the beauty. And when, you cannot save what you do not love, and you cannot love what you do not know. So that's one of the biggest things, trying to get people to fall in love and to know these places. And I think, if all 330 million people in the U.S. visited these places, there'd never be anything at risk of going away, because people would fall in love with it, and they just wouldn't accept these things disappearing from under our noses. But unfortunately, not everybody can go here. So, you know, we need to try to get as many people as possible and see and fall in love with the natural world.
Well, I think, and that's where your photography comes in, is just being able to also show things like this and let people fall in love with the photographs and know that it's out there without having to be there. But I'm dead serious. Next time I'm in the States, I want you to take me there.
We got to go. Yeah, we have to go.
I'm totally in, and I'll go down that canyon, no problem.
We would definitely. Yeah. No, it's a great place. Yeah, there's so much to love and so much like untrafficked and undiscovered. I mean, we could probably go with some climbing rope and some carabiners right now and discover an entirely new slot canyon if we wanted to. I mean, it's amazing, the expanse of Utah and Arizona. Awesome stuff.
That's awesome. All right, and then onto the photography. How did the photography, has that been a long-term thing, or have you got into that more recently? How did you get into photography?
Yeah, it started about the same time. So, you know, going back to that first trip to Belize I was talking about, that was right at the advent of digital photography.
Yeah.
So, you know, I used all my college savings to buy a 3-megapixel camera, state of the art, you know, 3 megapixels.
Yeah.
And took it with me. And just fell in love from the outset. And so that, you know, that basic point and shoot camera turned into a little bit more of an advanced one, and then another more advanced one. And then I started getting into DSLRs, you know, and then that was a basic one, used, very intro, and just gradually grew. And, you know, I don't know if it's the perfectionist that becomes a photographer or the photography makes a perfectionist, but you know, you crave these better and better images. And you're like, oh, if I just only had that lens, I could get a really shallow depth of field on these shots. Or if I only had that lens, I can take star photos. Or I really want to start taking photos of like the interiors of camps and like interiors of setups. And like, I need that lens. So, you know, it becomes, you know, as much of an addiction as a hobby.
No doubt. And what are you shooting with at the moment, Court? What are you shooting?
I'm on Canon, and I shoot Canon 5D4, so full frame. Yeah, absolutely love it. Although I am turning my head at these mirrorless lenses or mirrorless cameras. You're shooting on mirrorless Sony, right?
Yeah, Sony.
Yeah, and you love it.
It's the way forward in the world. Yeah. But that's a discussion for another time. This isn't a sales pitch. But yeah. It's changing photography. Mirrorless is definitely changing photography, and I think everything's pointing that direction. It's making things a bit lighter, and as you know, just moving around with gear is a very tough thing, especially with weight and having all this obsession of having more and more and more gear. So the lightness of it makes a big difference.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the two things I'm attracted to about maybe going mirrorless is the silent shutter, which is awesome because, you know, it's like as a guide and a photo guide, I mean, you don't want to be the one taking 10 times as many photos as your guest, but like I do. I just hold the shutter down. And then also the autofocus, the configurations seem amazing for like animal tracking and eye tracking and that.
Awesome. Autofocus is a game changer. It is it is cheating. Straight up, I'm going to say it's cheating. But that's okay.
Well, you're all using the tools that you're given.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'm going to change a bit more to the conservation side. Very briefly, I want you to, what's your base and your link point between NatHab and WWF, and how does that all work?
Yeah, so when I'm in the field, I'm obviously an expedition leader. In the office, I'm the director of sustainability and conservation travel. So in a way, I kind of act as a liaison between Natural Habitat and World Wildlife Fund. We are, of course, you know, two separate entities, but we are the travel arm of World Wildlife Fund US. And, you know, it's even one of their main missions, almost one of their pillars, so to speak, of getting conservation travel to happen, because they get it. They, you know, and not only are they trying to save wildlife, but they're trying to save people, you know, to be honest. I think that's one of the most interesting you know, one of the biggest positives of World Wildlife Fund is that they understand that to save habitat and wildlife, you need to save people. And, you know, we're all in the business of saving people because we are people, of course. Yeah, but they realize that if you can get tourists down in these areas, if you can get, you know, money flowing into these economies, you're saving people, you're saving communities, you're employing people, and therefore it saves habitats and the wildlife that are in them. So it's a huge, huge plus. So that's all a long way of saying that they buy into travel in a really, really big way, and they've been very supportive. So yeah, I act as a bit of a liaison. We obviously do a lot of guide trainings. We share a lot of information. And, you know, not only do we, you know, get the added benefit of their expertise on things, but we also get to tap into their members and help show them the world. You know, I think going back to that saying, you cannot save what you do not love, and you cannot love what you do not know. These people, you know, the members of World Wildlife Fund, of which there are almost 2 million in the U.S. alone, you know, they love wildlife. And I think if we can get them to see the species they've been so concerned and care so much about, you know, it sends their conservation commitment through the roof. I mean, all of a sudden they are even more of an advocate. They're writing more articles and sharing more photos and telling more friends about why we need to save natural places. And that's a big mission of ours and World Wildlife Funds as well.
Amazing, amazing. And then you recently did a zero waste trip, which I think, I mean, I obviously read all about it and followed the whole thing, but I just want you to explain to everyone what that was all about. I think it is an incredible idea, and applause you.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking about that. So last July of 2019, we did the world's first zero waste adventure, multi-day adventure in Yellowstone National Park with a group. We had 12 of us there, and we went basically, you know, down from whatever you would produce in a normal day of trash and consumables down to only, and I'm actually drinking water out of this. This is not the same jar, but we filled only one mason jar with actual trash. The definition of this was we are going to eliminate 99% of waste generated on the trip from going to landfill. So we're going to recycle, we're going to compost, we're going to refuse, reuse, upcycle, and then TerraCycle, which is a great new technology for some hard to recycle materials. And it was a really, really great eye-opening thing. Not only, you know, did we help set an industry first, not only did we get, you know, like 60 to 80 media mentions and articles about this to help spread the word about conservation, you know, and let me underline that point. You know, the reason we did it is not to just do one trip and say, oh, we did it, great, this is awesome. It was to turn heads. You know, we wanted to be a megaphone. People look at us, they, you know, as leaders, and if we can do that, you know, we may be the first, we definitely don't want to be the last. We're just doing it to influence the influencers of our world. And I think it really satisfied that quite well. So we got all these media attentions. We also got some information out of the trip for ourselves and for the travel industry. So I've since put together kind of like a best practices document of how to go zero waste as a tour operator, as a travel company. And so these are lessons we learned from the trip of, you know, how to best deal with compost, how to best deal with recycling, how to best prepare guests for being part of zero waste. What do we need to supply them with? What are the best ways to minimize packaging and pre-trip paper materials? It's a lot easier than you think. You know, we did it. We achieved our goal. Everything was just down into one mason jar, which is, you know, far less than 1%. But, you know, I think the biggest takeaway is that we don't need 12 people doing zero waste perfectly. We need 1 million people doing it imperfectly. So, you know, I do not expect anybody out there to necessarily want to do a repeat of this or, you know, turn themselves into a zero waste travel company. You know, be 50% zero waste or minimal waste, whatever you want to call it. Be 70%, 80%, you know, whatever. Just even if you just do one thing in your operations that improves the waste stream, you do that 1 million times over and you make huge change in the world.
Well, exactly. And I think one of the things that we always find, and one of the biggest challenges, is always food portion sizes that you get in hotels. People are worried about underfeeding people, and you end up with so much waste that just comes off of that side of things.
That was the biggest shocker, actually. The biggest surprise for us is, you know, so we had a highly eco-conscious group of travelers. Not only are our travelers in general quite eco-conscious, but we had more or less an invite out to people for this trip, and people knew it was zero waste. You know, they knew what they were getting into. And still, when we weighed everything that we produced on the course of the trip, you know, trash as well as recyclables, as well as compost was almost half of the weight of everything that we produced. And so this is people, you know, sharing meals. We advise people share meals. We advise people, you know, ask for half portions if you want. But still, I think one of the biggest challenges when you are traveling, so there's a stat out there that the average American produces about 4.4 pounds of trash a day, which is pretty staggering. Wow. During travel, you know, apart from eco-conscious travel, but there's no reason to think you would produce less than that. But you know, I think what it is when you're essentially eating in a restaurant 3 meals a day, you don't know what the portion sizes are. You don't know, you know, you may not be hungry. Sometimes, you know, I know people just have a bowl of cereal for dinner, or maybe they have a light lunch, they skip lunch and they have an early dinner. But when you're scheduled as part of a trip or a tour and you're doing a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you don't know frankly, you don't know the quality of the food. You might order that quiche, but then it turns out to be not what you like, you know, and so that's food waste. Now, we did a really, really great job on this trip of minimizing that. But, you know, so one example was someone ordered, we were in one of the national park lodges for lunch, and someone ordered carrot fries. Stay with me here. So curried carrot fries.
Oh, my God.
And the description on the menu was like, you know, as you'd think, like sounds good, like how sweet potato fries would be, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it was a large plate. We were going to share it with the whole group. So it was enough for, you know, 10, 12 people to munch on, a few bites here and there. And it comes out, and it's a huge bowl of cold carrot sticks with curry powder on it. I was like, huh. So, like, that's just a great example. And like, we hated it. It was like not what we want. Not that we don't like carrots, but, you know, like we're expecting, like, you know, crispy sweet potato fries. And these are just cold out of the fridge. So, like, you have that at some point in every trip, right? Yeah. And that went into the bucket. That went into the compost bucket. And we composted it. But nevertheless, you never know what you're going to get.
That's crazy. Okay. Now I'm going to challenge you because this is a guide's worst question in the whole world. But what is your most outstanding moment, sighting, experience that you've had out in the bush? I know there's millions, but try and just pick out one.
Yeah. So I'll give you two. I would say the first one that jumps to mind was 2 years ago in Borneo. We were on a night hike, and I've been looking kind of intently for the last 15 years for a Western tarsier, or one of these tarsiers. They look like little bush babies. They're about this big with big buggy eyes, and they're super cute and super interesting. Their ecology and natural history is fascinating. And we spotted one, and it was patient. It was 5 feet away from us. I got the photos of my lifetime, and it was like, oh my gosh. Now, every Borneo trip, I see so many amazing things that I'm so happy with, but it was just the general rarity in my own sightings to finally see that. So that's got to be very high up there. And then a close second, but very, very different kind of sighting was last January. I was guiding our Monarch Butterfly trips. And so I've studied Monarch Butterflies more than anything else, ecotourism. And you know, their numbers are in decline. The migration is getting smaller. There are bigger conservation issues. And the greatest sighting was not just seeing Monarch Butterflies for the zillionth time, but seeing their numbers far greater than I've ever seen in my career going down there. Like, from one year to the next, they blossomed into this much, much bigger colony, which is great for conservation. And the sightings were just incredible. Like, seeing them fly and seeing the numbers and the way that they had landed and roosted on the trees for the entire winter. It was right over the path. Yeah, there you go. Right over the pathway. And so we were just getting this better views than I've ever seen in my entire life. And it was just like, wow, like maybe this whole conservation travel thing is working. Like, maybe this is what it takes to save species. And so it was this very holistic aha moment where I'm obviously overjoyed and elated to see what I'm seeing, but also that, like, maybe, you know, this pleasure that we're all embarking on it as a group of tourists, like maybe it really is the key missing ingredient for some places to save the wild world. And it was a really, it filled me up in a great way.
Well, that's amazing, because, you know, I think passion, as guides, our passion overflows onto guests, and they tangibly feel that, and it changes their way of thinking. So to hear you use that, and it's not something jumping on something else, it's more the aha moment, that almost, I call it a sensual moment that you have out in the bush, in nature, with it all around, which is epic. So thanks very much. Yeah, and then last question before I go on to some quick questions, but I want to know, I saw you've just started a podcast.
Yes.
How did you go about doing the podcast? Tell us what it's about and where the guys can find it.
Absolutely. So it's a podcast on all things nature, wildlife, landscape, and travel photography. It's called The Wild Photographer. And I just like a lot of things in my life, I just took the bull by the horns, so to speak, and I just did it. You know, I started researching a good microphone. I've learned over the years of doing a lot of videography that audio quality is so important. So I'm like, yeah, okay, if there's anything to invest in and splash some money on, but you know, it wasn't much. It was like $100 microphone or something, and it sounds great. And basically, it's just me in a microphone talking about nature and wildlife photography tips. I have a great one, you know, on Nature Photography 101. I've got others that are coming out shortly about how to photograph fast-moving animals or people, fast-moving things. Yeah. I talk about, you know, how to solve the problem, the age-old problem of your camera fogging up, you know, when you're in tropical environments. Talking about like what is white balance and why is it important. So, yeah, I mean, I love that. I think it's a great way to learn. You know, the idea when I first set this up was, you know, anytime you're headed on a big safari, even local or far away, you're probably going to get on an airplane. And even though it may seem weird to try to understand and digest photography only by listening, it's actually more effective than you'd think. And there's a lot of time on airplanes. And I thought, well, you know, people can download this before they're headed to Africa. You know, listen to one of my podcasts about, you know, the five best ways to photograph lions as they're prepping, you know, on their flight. So yeah, I think it's gone pretty well. I'm looking forward to doing more of them. And yes, it's The Wild Photographer. And yeah, check it out. It's on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google. It's everywhere, and it's going pretty well.
Fantastic. I'm definitely going to check that out, and I might even steal the idea and put these interviews up as a little podcast.
Yeah,
but
yeah. And
it's just a nice way to get it up.
I would love to get into interviewing. You know, I was just going to keep things simple by like a one-on, like just me and the microphone right now. But the next step is to interview great photographers like yourself. Rich doesn't say this, but he's a terrific photographer, one of the best I've seen in our business. And yeah, definitely check out his photos too. I know that you probably have his Instagram handle here, and so some spectacular stuff out there.
Cool. Thanks, man. All right. So to end this all off, I want to do a quick fire 5 questions that you need to answer within 1 word to 1 sentence. All right. Okay. So what's your favorite trip? Of all the trips you do, what's your favorite trip?
Monarchs.
Okay.
Yeah, probably. I mean, God, that's the hardest question. Madagascar, Borneo, so close. We'll say Monarchs.
Okay. If you weren't a guide, what would you be?
Tap dancer. No, kidding.
Fantastic. I think we need a video of that.
Yeah, right now. No, I don't. Terrible at dancing. I don't know. Maybe I would just say like more on the professional photography end of things, or maybe like a travel writer. Getting into guitar pretty heavy these days. I don't know. Maybe I'll take it on the road. I don't know. It's a tough one. Yeah. Well, I'll say travel writer and photographer. It's very similar to what I do already, though.
Cool. We've got 1 minute 43 seconds left. So, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in the last 12 months?
Oh, you know, it's not. Old Chuck Darwin said it this way: it's not the strongest nor the fittest of species that survive, but those most adaptable to change. Be adaptable to change.
Amazing. And I think the whole world is going through change right now.
Mm-hmm.
Then, if you had the opportunity to make one rule for travelers all over the world, what would that rule be?
Make sure you leave money in local economies.
Love it.
I mean, it's a very technical one, and I don't mean like literally leave money. It's like when you're buying trips and planning trips, making sure that they are locally based and it's not going to some, you know, outside overseas organization. Exactly.
And then last question, if you could choose one trip to go on that you haven't been on, where would you go?
Ooh, Patagonia. That's next on my list. I want to see pumas in Patagonia.
Yeah, I was just watching the new BBC program, 7 Worlds, 1 Planet, and they were showing puma stuff. I just want to get there immediately.
Yeah, it looks so great. Yeah, I have not been, but it looks amazing.
Court, thanks so much for your time and spending so much time and chatting to us. And I really, really loved the chat, and I look forward to seeing you over in the States or when you're out this side next time.
Can't wait,
and
Rich.
Good luck and stay safe.
Hey, well, thanks so much, and thanks for everyone tuning in here. This is fantastic. Really a pleasure to be a part of it. We'll probably do some more of these.
Awesome. Thanks, Court. Cheers.